and welcome to the 45th ETP4HPC webinar. I'm Pascal, I'm ETP4HPC's Communication Manager. And today we are going to talk about open source and European sovereignty for HPC. It's a slight change from our usually technical topics, and we hope you'll enjoy it. So for those of you who are not familiar with ETP4HPC, we are a non-profit association that promotes European research and innovation in HPC and neighboring areas. And we are a private member of the EuroHPC JU. Also, I forgot to mention my colleague Gabriela is also here today, and she is helping me in the background, in particular with questions. So before we delve into today's topic and before I introduce the speakers, I need to share a couple of practical information with you. So this webinar is recorded and you will receive the link to the recording tomorrow. This webinar is in listen-only mode, but you can communicate with us through the GoToWebinar control panel. You can ask questions using the question tool, and you can also download the slides. They are available in the webinar in the handouts section. So really feel free to download them. So today's speakers, so we have two speakers today. Thierry Goubier, he's a program manager at CEA List, focusing on high performance architectures, both HPC and embedded. He is at CEA since 2007, and he participated in numerous European projects. Our second speaker is Gaël Blondel, and he is the good complement for Thierry because he's specialized in open source. You can see he has a lot of experience in open source, and he's currently the Secretary and Vice President of Community Operations at the Eclipse Foundation, and also he's the Secretary of the Board for the Open Source Initiative. Also, I would like to give special thanks to ETP4HPC member Manolis Maratsakis from Force for suggesting this webinar. And Manolis is with us today, and he will probably have questions for our speakers when we come to the Q&A. So, without further ado, let's delve into today's topic. And Thierry, I will make you presenter so you can share your slides.
Let's try that and hoping that works as is expected. Does it? Yes, thank you very much.
Working?
Yeah, well, at least I see the share.
Yeah, we see your slides.
Okay, then it's on. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Pascal, Gabriela, and Manolis for having the opportunity to talk about this subject. So about HPC, open source and sovereignty, with a slightly different angle than usual, I guess. But let's go on. I said in the run-up to this event, both I and Gaël are involved in a recently released High Peak Vision 2026, and we chart European technical roadmaps in the years to come. So it has a lot of technical elements this talk draw upon, and well, it's a huge amount of work, lots of contributions, and we're very proud of it. So don't hesitate to read it. And so the core of the vision this year is Europe should not imitate others. It should create its own future. So this is the basis for the first part of this talk. And before give the hand to Gaël to tell a lot more knowledge about how open source is run in the field and the comments. So First, let's start with sovereignty. I want to it's a complex concept, so I'm not that qualified to talk about it, but I'll use symbols instead to try to go around the concept and say what seems to be important for the ETP4HPC community in the sovereignty aspect. Okay, symbol of sovereignty, I think is something we're fairly familiar. We have an intuition about it, that things like a flag, an army, a police force, a currency, a language, lots of things can be considered as symbol of sovereignty. And we end up with quite a significant concept in terms of research and institutions and HPC, is that a research center doing classified research is clearly a symbol of sovereignty. A supercomputer also. If you go to supercomputing, you'll see the rankings, you'll see the countries, you'll see the continents listed. It's clear it's a symbol of sovereignty. And as such, it's a target. It's a target in a world these days where governments are ready to go against institutions, higher education institutions, for example, for like telling they have political alignments, there are nest of wokeism and so on, nothing to relate with a real case, and to act against them. So what does that give us when we relate that to open source? So I'm going to try to look at open source with a slightly different angle than the official definition. Okay, it's what's important for open source and free software overall is freedom of access, use, understanding, and contribution to digital assets. Okay, remember that key. Open source is about community and sharing, and it's also about giving back, not only using open source or cloning an open source project. So this covers a bit on the various forms: open source, free software, open hardware, and it's really, really significant in our overall ecosystem. It's a huge contribution to build our systems on common operating systems, tools, programming languages, framework, libraries, even hardware component standards, protocols, etc., etc. There's all sorts of work in the Creative Commons, so it's really, really significant for all the things we do. So, but there's an interesting side to open source, is that it's not only virtual. Okay, it's not without any relation to overall structures. It's an instrument to foster collaborations and diffuse the technologies and values. And as such, it's soft power. And soft power is the way a country wants to influence others through proactive collaborations. Okay, so the problem is, who control that? What does it need things like an infrastructure to exist? And what does that make it when we look at sovereignty, that is our ability to make decisions independently? Well, I gave again a definition to sovereignty that's not too good. So open source as software means you look at organizations and actors. And what you see is foundations. Where are they incorporated? It's not neutral. Funds. Who pays for those foundations? Who pays for the staff? Infrastructure. When you look at open source, what you know is that it needs servers, hosting, continuous integration, packages, package management, mailing list, all this to support contributors and users. And this is things, okay? They're not, okay, open source is, the digital assets are a lot more, they use far less resources, but they're not using zero resources. And the one that invests into those has the control. And honestly, it's money that talk, not time and free voluntary contributions. Sorry to rain on maybe the good sides of open source. But let's take an example to make it clearer. Okay, take the Python Software Foundation. Controls the evolution of Python. Handle the centralized package manager PyP. Okay, it's a corporation incorporated in the state of Delaware, US. It's recognized by the US authorities because it's a non-profit charitable organizations. And I think it's a great organization that has very good values, non-discrimination, access, empowerment of communities, and does a lot of work. But they, as of 2026, this foundation policies are at odds with the US government policies. Again, they had any issues about state funding regarding that. Okay, and the second is that they are incorporated in the US. They have to apply US government policies like sanctions. Okay, and I think if we look carefully into those sanctions and the regulations, they have to deny Python use to International Criminal Court staff. Okay, so that's where the power lies. So the point about that is that when you invest into an organization and you're an HPC center, you're a symbol of sovereignty. You're an easy target for sanctions, honestly, okay? If you're Chinese, you're already under sanctions. That's already done. If you're European, maybe not yet, but what the future holds. And that means if you invest into having influence over those projects, you can work within the Python Software Foundation, for example. But if you get under sanction, they have to cut you off. You lose your access. You can't communicate with them anymore. And you lose all the community you have with it. So this is something you need to, a risk you need to deal with. We need to focus on. And governments may use open source and projects they own, they control, because it's under the law, as leverage as well. So we should make those communities resilient, okay? We should be able to make them robust to a government influence. And Europe has a role to play for that, okay? And we should shoulder its weight at the European level, okay? And that means stewardship and resources, hosting, compute, chapters, you name it, you know what it is. And I think it's important because it protects European contributions, individual contribution to open source project. Okay, and that's basically the core of my argument today. And for HPCs, that means we need to ensure that open source community of importance for the HPC area are made resilient in Europe. Okay, and I think it's a benefit for them as well in the US, because I don't think the situation is really nice for them as well. When your own government, the one that has power over you, is against your own values. Okay, and we need to say it's part of the HPC infrastructure we're building in Europe. Okay, so maybe, I don't know if it's Euro HPC, joint undertaking, or at other levels, we need to think about that. And remember also that from my little past in French diplomatic network, open source and free software are very important for the rest of the world as well. And Europe has a role to play on that. We have values, we have things to bring, and the world wants us to be there. Okay, so we need to keep the openness, the collaboration, the freedom that goes with open source, but we need to make it work. Thank you for my part, and I give the hand to Gael, and I hope I haven't exploded the time.
Thank you very much. So now, Gael, I think you are presenter, so you can download, open your own presentation.
Yeah. I think you can see my presentation now. Well, so yeah, thank you, Thierry, for this great introduction, because that's also eye-opening for me about a lot of the points you mentioned is questions we often have to answer. And so that's a very, very good introduction to the topic. So yeah, I'm Gael Blondel. Thanks, Pascal, Gabriela, Manolis for setting up this this webinar, and I'm very happy to be here today. Just after, well, you heard about me in the introduction, so but maybe you don't necessarily know so much about the Eclipse Foundation. So this is the organization I work for. We are the leading open source foundation in Europe. Interestingly, we were created 22 years ago in the US. So we were also established in Delaware as a 501c6 at the time, so a non-profit but not a charity. But we decided to move to Europe sometimes in 2019, 2020, because we saw the growing interest for open source in Europe, and also we already had a majority of EU organizations as members. Our goal is really to help companies, researchers, and individuals collaborate on business-friendly open source projects. And I come back to that later. But our main principle is to manage those projects according to our core principles of transparency, openness, meritocracy, and vendor neutrality. But and like you saw in my biography, I'm also a member of the board of the Open Source Initiative. So I would fail to my duties if I don't remind you explicitly what is open source, and that's super important. It's that by definition, since 1984, when Richard Stallman started the free software movement, open source and free software comply with the four freedoms, that you can run a program for any purpose. So anybody can run an open source program for any purpose. There is no limitation of endeavor. You can study how the program works, you can redistribute the software, and you can modify the software. And so it's important, because when we start talking about digital sovereignty, often we hear people, I had people asking me, for example, can we call it open source but limit it to Europe? And well, you could limit it to Europe, but you should not call it open source. It could be something different. So it's really important that open source, by definition, comes with no limitations. And of course, when you are established in a country, you have to comply with the law of the country. So that's exactly the topic that Thierry was mentioning earlier for the Python Software Foundation, for example. And we are also subject to a lot of regulations as Eclipse Foundation. One important aspect is that when people think about open source, most of the time they think about the community, about those people who don't know each other but contribute to the project, etc. And it has been so successful in the last 25, 30, 40 years, because it's super easy for an author to publish their software under an open source license. It's also then very easy for a consumer to consume that very, very specific software under this license. And the beauty of open source is that the licenses are short. Usually, if you take the Apache software license, for example, it's only 2-3 pages long, and it's understood globally in a similar way. And so that really makes it easy to collaborate at a global scale, and also if you mix that global approach with the 4 freedoms, it's a big enabler for innovation. Now, something that people are not so familiar with is the role of foundations. And more or less, you can do open source without an open source foundation. But the role of an open source foundation like us is to enable sustainable, vendor neutral, and open collaboration. And that's super important because it's deep in our bylaws that our mission is about sustainability of the project and ensuring vendor neutrality. And also, we are non-profit organizations. So as non-profits, we have to stick to our bylaws and our values, and our members decide if we want to evolve those bylaws. But that's so deep and so much the core concept behind the foundation that you can trust that it will be there for forever. And this, to illustrate that, this is the mission of the Eclipse Foundation. So 3 statements: ensuring user freedom. It's all about making sure that companies can access open source technologies forever, as long as they are hosted at Eclipse. Empowering developers. Ultimately, the source code that is hosted in our project is developed by individual developers. And so we need to provide them the tools they need to be successful. And we also consider them as individuals. For example, a committer to a project will stay a committer even if they move to another company. And enabling collaboration, it's really about having the right governance models so that we enable large corporations, smaller organizations, research institutions, and individuals to collaborate in business-friendly communities around the same open source software. So I will just go very quickly on that because I want to move to the topic of digital sovereignty. But one aspect is that we have a strong governance layer to enable this collaboration. So we have a lot of things to explain how to do IP management and licensing, how to take decisions in projects and or how to govern a group of projects together to align roadmaps, etc. One important thing is that it's not only the documents, but it's also the team that has developed the skills for the last 20 plus years to implement that with the members and with the community. And recently, because it becomes so important, we are also adding the topic of supply chain security to the mix, because we are all conscious, and to some extent that's very much related to digital sovereignty. We are all conscious that supply chain security becomes another big topic for open source. One example of some stuff we host, and just to explain, because lots of you have heard about Eclipse 20 years ago and think that it's only this development tools, but we have projects in open hardware, like the Open Hardware Foundation is hosting RISC-V core implementations that are at a very high level of maturity. We have an embedded real-time operating system, for example, that you likely use because it's integrated in some smartphones and it's integrated in a lot of appliances, and it's safety certified. So that's interesting. An interesting message here is that you can do open source and have and address safety and security at the same time, because open source is really the collaboration layer, and safety and security is more the other non-functional aspects of your software. We have development tools, and we have application blocks in different domains like software-defined vehicle, IoT, etc. And all of that being managed in a vendor-neutral and community-driven way. Now let's move on the topic of digital sovereignty. One thing I would like to start with is that open source is global by nature. When you think about the four freedoms, it's definitely global by nature. And if you look at the US export control system, for example, I think that for the last 15 or maybe 20 years, open source is exempt from export control. It's not very strong exemptions because it's maybe 2-3 lines in a regulation that could be changed pretty easily. But the main idea is that open source is available everywhere anyway, so it doesn't really make sense to try to control open source. Still, what Thierry said is very true, is that we can imagine that at some point some geopolitical blocks would want to put some obstacles in the open source collaboration. So that's still a risk. As Europeans, when we are talking about digital sovereignty, we very often, and recently we have often heard about the fact that we need European stacks. And then the question is, but what makes a stack European? Is it that the code has been written by Europeans? Is it that the code is hosted in Europe? Is it that should we rewrite all the code because we want and should we track the nationality or the pedigree of all the committers? So I think that it's not the code by itself that makes a stack European. So always use the best software for the problem at hand. Just make sure that this is open to European contribution, and also make sure that at some point, and I come back to that, you have the opportunity to fork, and you need to build the capability and the skills to be able to fork the project in case you need it. Which means that what makes a stack European is European mastery. So we need skills to be able to assemble a stack. We need skills to be able to contribute to the project. And then the next step is we need skills to show European leadership. And we can also want European governance for a European stack. Ultimately, the goal is that we are free to innovate, and we are not limited by the principles or the values of others that may come with the technology. Two important aspects is that open source is everywhere, and when we hear about software-defined vehicle, software-defined network, software-defined everything, it's likely that there will be a strong open source aspect behind that. Because ultimately, when industry players want to collaborate, there are not so many options. You can create a joint venture, you can create a new standardization body or standardization association, or you can start collaborating very fast and very concretely on software code, and that's just doing open source. And we know that it has proven to be successful and efficient for the last few decades. And that's super important, because if we start thinking that, oh yeah, we want to do something that is our approach of software-defined aspect with in a European way, with and we will not do it open source, then well, it's likely that there will be an open source option, and it's likely that this open source option will get lots of momentum, because that's the path. The communities kind of follow the path of least resistance. So if you have something that is using a permissive license, if you have an ecosystem that is welcoming, then people who want to collaborate will join that ecosystem, because at some point they want to fix specific issues, and they will just take the best solution at hand at some point to do it. One thing that we don't necessarily keep in mind when we talk about open source and digital sovereignty is that open source is not only about source code. Today, everybody who is using open source is using open source through a package manager. Like if you are in the JavaScript ecosystem, you are using NPM. If you are in Python, you are using PyPy. In Java, Maven Central. In Rust, Crates. And so all of those package managers today are indeed hosted in the US. And we can imagine that we can mirror those servers. And of course, that would be a good first step. But it's not only about where the open source, where the assets are available, where the binaries are available. It's also about having the skills and in terms of building software, configuration management, etc., to be able to fully replicate the processes or mirror not only the servers, but also mirror the processes around those projects. So I think if you think about it, recently, ENISA, for example, started to have their own vulnerability database, whether, I don't know, 18 months ago, everybody was just relying on the MITRE database, MITRE CV database. And I think that at some point, we need to have similar approaches to make sure that we have good level of technology independence. Because if we would lose access to one of those package managers, then that would be a big drama in a few weeks. Maybe a general topic about open source is that when we want to be successful with open source, the successful open source projects are the ones with an extensible architecture, because that's the ones that enable creating an ecosystem. If you think about Kubernetes, if you think about Eclipse, if you think about VS Code today, Drupal, they all have an extensible architecture. So to come back to open source and digital sovereignty, open source is an enabler because you can have full control over the technology. You can inspect the technology and apply, filter the new modifications, etc. So that's a white box approach. But it only works if we have the skills and if we have the resources to inspect what is inside the open source project. In terms of data, of course, you can know what the data are. That brings data sovereignty, because you can also inspect what the software is doing with the data, and that brings vendor independence, and that enables local innovation. But one aspect is that a lot of organizations are using open source. Some organizations are contributing to open source, and what we need is really more organizations that invest enough to be able to lead with open source projects. I think that sovereignty is really a function of this kind of leadership. So yeah, think about Berkeley with Jupyter notebooks, for example, or Google when they launched Kubernetes. It's really about going a step further than publishing open source code. It's going the step where you build a strong ecosystem around this open source code. And one thing we have we kind of have a tendency in Europe, culturally, I would say, to work on our own, and we like coming back to first principles and reinvent the wheel and find and build better solutions. So I would say that if you put if you put 4 European scientists in a room, maybe you will end up with more than 4 solutions, because they will all have their own very own solution, and then they will start talking about interoperable solutions between their own solutions. So the point there is really a point in organizing those open source communities and aligning and finding the trade-offs, and again the extensible platforms that enable us to work together. So that's really not just being the pilot fish for the big sharks in helping them figure out small innovations, but also being bold enough, even if organizations in Europe, or software organizations are mostly smaller than what can exist in the US and in China. I think that good collaboration is really the path to success. And just the idea is really that consuming open source is remaining a passenger. But if you want digital sovereignty, it's really about investing in open source, mastering your open source dependencies, and leading the projects that are important to you. And also, when we say invest in open source, I always like a lot the story of Kubernetes, because if you look for the story of the Kubernetes project, it's not something that started with a team of 200 people working for 10 years to build Kubernetes. It really started with a team maybe twice the size of the people you see on this photo. So that's a photo taken at OSCON, an open source conference in 2018, when they received an award for the most impactful project at the time. And when you read about the story, it really started with 2 or 3 guys who already had the experience of working on the internal orchestrator inside Google on Borg, and started to work in 2013 on Kubernetes, and then got the help of Sarah Novotny, who is on the photo, who was in charge of community building, and Kelsey Hightower, who was their community advocate. And then they created the version 1.0 in 2015, and creating an open source foundation at the same time, and bootstrapped with maybe an investment of a couple of dozens of $1 million. They managed to bootstrap several $1 billion ecosystem. So that's also the power of exponential power of adoption of open source, and that's something we need to keep in mind. As soon as we make the step to move from lower TRL levels to create the community and go to higher TRL levels, then open source is really a way to get new technologies adopted fast and furious, I could say. So just my conclusion on the topic is that sometimes I hear people, again, who want to think about digital sovereignty in Europe as open source projects written by Europeans for Europeans in Europe. I'm not sure that's the right path. The point is that we don't need to rewrite the global open source standards. We don't need anybody to rewrite Kubernetes like it is now. We need the engineering capabilities to be able to fork those projects if our independence demands it. And that's something that is super important, because that's where we gain this sovereignty. And that requires a significant investment. Thank you. I think we
Thank you, Gaël.
For questions.
This is Pascal again. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I had to reconnect from my phone because I was kind of ejected from my session. So we'll sort out the technical problems later. So thank you, Gaël, and thank you, Thierry, too, because I was off when you finished your presentation. We have here today also Manolis. I thought maybe Manolis, you have a question to our speakers, or maybe you wanted to share your own opinion about this.
Right. I would like to thank the speakers and also ask them a question. Perhaps each of them can provide a comment. Part one is about the concept of a supply chain. I think particularly with system software and scientific computing software in the HPC domain, but also in the AI world, we have many dependencies across software packages. They come from very diverse sources. Some of them are quite old. Many of them are supported by very small teams of experienced maintainers. They are spread in different legal jurisdictions. So in my mind, this is an area where what you just said today somebody needs to be careful about. So from the point of view of Thierry, the concept of soft power in a sense is the capability to control what is prioritized, what is released, how it is released, from the point of view that Gaël actually put forward the concept of supply chain to some extent. And he brought up also the concept of collaboration. So in this environment of complex dependencies between software packages, I think we all pretty much agree on the intuition of soft power, etc. What do you think needs to be done? What are, shall we say, common sense steps? And likewise, what would be more ambitious steps to take so that we have a more, shall we say, robust infrastructure on which to build future systems? I'm not even taking the, shall we say, the national sovereignty point of view, just how can I have robust systems that I can trust? If you can share your thoughts on that, and perhaps people on the audience can challenge your views and my question, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting question. I think I'll chart what would be my view on the two aspects, short term and long term. We stuck with a current stack that where it's very easy to import the world. Okay, honestly, like you do import and then you do imports and so on, and you learn to work like that. You're not a developer, you're a plumber that connects things and import everything. So a short term is to say, okay, we look at all these things, all those dependencies, because this is the way we work, and we make sure critical steps, which are the package manager, the source, the place from where you download this stuff is resilient. So distributed, replicated, okay? Having one entity control everything, a single point, is first a vulnerability in terms of power. The one that has that single point has a lot of leverage over you. And the second, which is trickier, and that happened again last week with the Mistral attack, is that it's very, very weak in terms of security. Okay, because it's you have your magic access to the world over, and if you attack that, you get it. The more ambitious vision is to consider that maybe it's not an idea to build stack over millions and millions of lines of code and thousands of aggregated packages. Maybe we need to look at how we're not mastering anymore that level of complexity. Okay, and maybe AI will basically see that it's like Gruyere. It's a cheese with lots of holes, and lots of holes means lots of security problems and mastery. And that would be the long-term view for me.
Right. Thanks,
No.
Gael. How about you?
Yeah, I have a different. So, okay, the supply chain of open source is a big topic. So, of course, when you start developing today, you will pick a framework that will have dozens of dependencies with dozens of dependencies, etc., etc. There are a few topics I want to mention. Not all ecosystems are equal. Like you have NPM, for example, with sometimes very small packages that are used by millions of other packages, and that can be a problem. But all ecosystems have the issue. The issue that you have more and more state actors and hackers who try to inject problems in the packages. And at Eclipse we are now operating OpenVSX, which is an open marketplace for VS Code extensions. You have two marketplaces in the world for VS Code extensions, the Microsoft one and OpenVSX. And I can tell you that the cost of hosting OpenVSX and adding security measures when people publish plugins, etc., is significant. So I could share the link maybe later, but the open source ecosystem published an open letter like 6 months ago about the fact that the free dependency on package managers cannot last for too long, because the cost of hosting a package manager is growing exponentially, because not only you have more and more people using, and so in terms of bandwidth and servers you need to provide more and more, but also the security topic is more and more important. About how we approach a security topic, it's interesting I want to mention two initiatives. Alpha Omega. Alpha Omega is an initiative that has been started by Amazon, Microsoft, and Google after Heartbleed, where they put money every year to sustain open source initiatives that improve the security of the open source ecosystem. And in Europe, we have the Sovereign Tech Fund Agency in Germany that has been doing a great job and is a great example of what can be done. They have distributed public money not only to German entities, they have distributed public money to the people who could improve the security of open source projects that matter to Germany. And if you think about it, they didn't care too much if they are based in Germany, in France, or somewhere else. The point is, can you move the needle of improving the cybersecurity of this package? And so, and the next point is that we at the Eclipse Foundation, we have access through our partnership with Alpha Omega. We have access to Mythos, and so it's interesting to see that yes, we have lots of work ahead of us to fix security issues that a model like Mythos can find. But open source is not at bigger risk than proprietary software there, because AI is also very good at reverse engineering stuff. So at least we are a bit ahead of the wave. We know we can see the wave coming, and we are working actively with all the communities to well, not ride the wave, but to to survive the wave. And there is a point, a good faith argument to say that maybe with those models we will have a much better cybersecurity in a couple of years than we do have now, because we have to fix it. And there is an article from Mozilla Foundation that has been published a couple of days ago on that topic, that you have two options about this topic, like oh, the AI, we will be killed by AI cybersecurity issues, or we will fix it. And yeah, let's see how we can fix it.
Thank you.
I already see a potential follow-up panel exactly on these last comments by the two speakers. I think Pascal.
You mean a follow-up webinar?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
What they just said.
Okay.
There are questions in the chat. Just before moving.
Yes. I will. Yeah. I wanted to check with you if we can go on to the questions from the audience. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So first question is from Sari Katarina Repeat. Good question. What makes a stack European? How do we build, for instance, a sovereign European AI ecosystem? But even more importantly, how do we boost and accelerate entrepreneurship in an interoperable and frictionless fashion in EU? So the questions are in the chat for everyone. So who takes this one?
I can start, and then I think Gael will have something to say.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay.
Go ahead.
That's a good question. I can answer by the same way. I think I would make a first point about the question is that open source is not in the question, and that's something interesting. because if we look carefully at it, Gael is laughing. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things you notice about open source is that it can be used against your own sovereignty. Basically, if you have a market, if you have companies selling a product, another country can open source a competing solution. And as Gael said, the more open wins. Okay? Sovereignty and open source can be a contradiction. Okay? So that's the first that comes with the question. So European stack, we sort of have a definition and so on in that. Sovereign AI is a bit more complex subject because, if you notice, there's a question of resources. I think AI costs a lot in energy, in compute. And that means you need to have those resources available to build it. However, I think our discussion is very interesting for the part that says boost and accelerate entrepreneurship. And this is where open source is key. It's an infrastructure, okay? Anything that you build through open source, when you invest into the open source ecosystem, governance, tools, and everything. That's why the sovereignty angle is so important, okay? This is the infrastructure, the roads, the buildings, the services you will build your entrepreneurship on. So this is really key. Open source is really, really the way to accelerate. Now, make Europe a unified market to simplify those things. Maybe it's more political question, so I leave it aside. But in open source as infrastructure, and infrastructure we can count on. So that's where the sovereignty angle, the resilience is so important. Okay, we want to trust in our infrastructure because this is a key for building entrepreneurship on top of it. Yeah,
well, I would say 2-3 things. First one is investing in open source infrastructure. I like your point, Thierry, about open source is infrastructure. And I think we struggle with that because it's easy to found a data center because it's brick and mortar and you can see it and you can feel it. And when you when you are the funding agency, you can go for the inauguration, etc., etc. But investing in open source as software, as source code, and being really ambitious and demanding on the result is in terms of source code. Like one element that makes open source successful is that code matters. That's source code that win. It's not the best ideas or the best 30 pages deliverable that you have to push to this portal or that other portal. It's really source code that win. And that's and my last point is that we need to love and to support developers. So if you want to, and I think we are not doing so well in Europe on that front. We do pretty well in loving developers in the research ecosystem, but maybe not so well in the business ecosystem. Like when you look at the structure of North American companies, for example, they have people who stay developers or in a technical career forever, and they will have a strong career growth in this domain. I think that in Europe, the default is still that to move to management topics. And when you move to management topics, you stop writing code. And so you are not, you can only be useful if you help and support the people who are writing the code.
Interesting point. Can we go on to the next question from our audience? And by the way, it does not contain the word open source either. So it's a question from Mika Twishku. Should Europe promote more non-profit ventures, steward-led startups backed up by non-profit foundations? And there is a URL, so if you look at the chat, you can see the URL. Who wants to react on this?
I can take that one. Thanks for the link. I will look at it. That seems an interesting. I was not aware of this one. Well, I'm not sure it's about being non-profit or not. It's I mean at Eclipse we promote open source in a way that we want people to collaborate on open source platforms and build any kind of business on top of that. If they want to build a small business in a cooperative way, etc., good for them if that's useful for the ecosystem. If they want to build a startup and try to get the exponential growth of the Silicon Valley model and want to be rich and retire at 35, well, if they are successful, they will still contribute to the open source project. And so from an open source point of view, I'm more interested in people who have found their very own reason why they should contribute to an open source project.
Okay.
I can complement a bit using the infrastructure angle. If we say open source is infrastructure, then we can look at how we run other infrastructure, especially in Europe, because we have a fairly significant European touch in running infrastructure, for example, healthcare. What you see is that there's no reason why, as a public entity or as a political position, we pay a company to maintain an open source infrastructure. Why not? We do that for roads. We do that for healthcare. There's no contradiction between open source and for-profit entities working on that infrastructure. It's a service. It's a benefit for all. So.
Okay.
I think we should skip the one.
Yes, the next one.
That's off topic.
It's off topic, absolutely. So you can all read it in the chat if you wish, but there was another question from Sari Katarina Ripi, but it's slightly off topic, so we'll leave it here for your own reflections. Can we go to the question from Anne Bernard Bedouet? Well, it's more a comment, I think, but Open source simulation tools are attractive for industry, but adoption is often limited by low TRL, weak usability, limited documentation, lack of structured support, and difficult integration into industrial workflows. For companies, this can mean more time, more expert involvement, and higher operational risk compared to commercial solutions. Data protection is also critical. Companies need clear guarantees that sensitive models, simulation data, and results remain confidential and are not accessed or reused by third parties. So who wants to react on this?
I want to react on this one. I think that part of the, so we are investing lots of money in research projects with an incentive to publish results in open source. But too often, we restart from scratch every 3 years. And I think that there's no there's no obligation to restart from scratch every 3 years. So we can ask the European Commission to approach it from a point of view that we are fine if you push the TRL of your open source project a bit up. So that's first thing first. The fact that in the call for our projects, we have limitations that an RIA, for example, should be just TRL4. It's not very useful to then become successful. So we should really take the own responsibility of saying, hey, with this funding, we go to TRL4, but we will also push that feature to TRL6 or 7, etc. And so also at Eclipse, we are involved in research in Horizon Europe projects. And what we realize is that 3 years is not enough to be successful with an open source project. But when you have a follow-up project, and then the researchers can decide that, hey, in my next funded project, I will continue working on the same open source framework. Then when in 6 years, you really have the opportunity to build something relevant and to push some features in the higher TRLs.
Okay, now it's time to close, but I just wanted to mention the last question from Fabri Plana. Open source is important, but the question is, when will Europe found the next company of the same format as ASML or SAP? And another question is, how open is OpenAI? So, yeah, I think, as you say, Manolis, I mean, we have material for a second webinar on the topic.
So there is a trick. Usually when there is open in the name, it's not so open. When you have to say you are not open.
Yeah, that's an answer, but I think a vibrant ecosystem, to link the first question about boosting entrepreneurship, is our best bet to get the next ASML. Okay, but at the same time, we may need to agree on maybe going the unicorn, dreaming of unicorns all the time is not the solution. Okay, we need to have vitality, diversity, and from there we'll get champions. Don't forget that we also have lots of European champions in many, many areas, and we tend to forget them.
Thank you. So, can we close the webinar on this positive comment?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank everyone. Thank our audience for being here. A big thank you to Gaël and Thierry for their presentation. I think it was extremely interesting. A big thank you to Gabriela for taking over when the technical problems were against me. And I don't have a date for the next webinar, but you'll receive an invitation whenever we organize this. But I would like to mention that ETP4HPC will be at ISC in June in Hamburg, and we have a booth there. So we'll be very happy to see you on our booth if you're visiting ISC. So thank you, everyone, and I hope we will talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So now I'm trying to close this session properly. Do you think